Anyone who can move the strings of patriotism can play the most distinguished melodies. In January 2021, Poland conducted a virtual war game against a hostile power from the east, presumably Russia. The simulation included new weapons that Poland had ordered, including F-35 fighters, Patriot anti-aircraft systems, and HIMARS rocket launchers, all state-of-the-art weaponry. The Polish military command expected to hold the line for at least 22 days. By day 4, Russian troops had broken through and were besieging the capital, Warsaw. Polish losses were devastatingly high, and the country waved surrender by day 5. The war game was a disgraceful disaster, so much so that the government classified further details. Now, Poland is looking to make things right. A new draft law looks to double the size of the armed forces from 150,000 to 300,000, while modernizing equipment and training. If fully implemented, Poland will emerge with one of the largest militaries in the region, becoming an arsenal of Europe. I'm your host Shirvan and welcome to Caspian Report. Today's video is sponsored by Conflict of Nations, a free online strategy game where you choose a real country to lead into a modern global conflict. Up to 128 other players are moving their units across the map in real time. So, to win, you need to form alliances and build all types of units, including tanks, jets, and submarines. Conflict of Nations is a vast game. A game round can take weeks to complete, which makes logistics as necessary as tactics. The thing that I like most about the game is that you can play with the same account on both PC and mobile. That convenience sets it apart from other games. Now, using our link below, you will get an exclusive gift, 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. The offer is only available for 30 days, so move fast. In the state of nature, violence is the only law, and life is vicious, ruthless, and brief. Individuals preserve themselves through self-interest and skepticism, and though human beings have since escaped this anarchic system, Poland is still stuck in the middle of it. Stretching from Western Europe to the Ural Mountains in the east, the European plain is a geopolitical superhighway. Its lack of internal boundaries made its early inhabitants vulnerable to raids and invasions. Northern Europeans had to strike first or be struck down themselves. And when civilization finally came, militaristic cultures developed. Conflict became the iron law of European diplomacy, and great military powers dominated the international scene. In the 16th century, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was one such state. At its height, it covered 1 million square kilometers and comprised 15% of Europe's population. Yet, for all its glory and prestige, this power vanished from the map when Austria, Prussia, and Russia conspired to carve it up. From then on, Polish identity survived only in language and memory. It wasn't until World War I that Poland regained its independence, but this too was short-lived. In 1939, the German-Soviet pact divided Poland once more. 1/5 of its population perished in the ensuing war before Polish lands fell under Russian influence. Only when the Iron Curtain started to crumble in 1989 did Poland achieve independence once more. History weighs heavily on Polish consciousness. Warsaw is skeptical of neighboring powers and retains a robust, independent identity. Like so, despite its commitments to multilateral institutions, Poland prioritizes self-interest above all else. Since leaving the Soviet bloc, Poland has pursued this interest by integrating into the European economic and military ecosystems. Warsaw joined NATO in 1999 and the European Union 5 years later. This presented two advantages. First, Warsaw gained powerful allies in the West that could guarantee its safety. Second, by securing its western frontier, it could concentrate resources on balancing Russia in the east. This arrangement allows Poland to maintain its independence while reaping the benefits of European integration. Of course, Russia hasn't stood casually by. Since Poland joined the EU and NATO, Moscow has intervened in Abkhazia, South Ossetia, Crimea, and Donbas, territories belonging to Georgia and Ukraine respectively. Now, Russia is pushing further west through the use of hybrid warfare. Polish and Russian interests are already colliding in the Baltics, Belarus, and Ukraine, and will continue to do so. The odds of a future conflict, in whatever form, are high. Russia's posturing is inspired by America's shifting strategic calculus. Moscow is no longer Washington's chief concern, Beijing is, and as follows, the United States wants to scale down its role in Europe, yet the weakness of its Atlantic partners prevents it from doing so. Though NATO provides a military spending guideline of 2% of the GDP, most European partners continue to fall short. Europe is just not self-sufficient in its defense, far from it. Poland is an exception. The country's open geography and troubled history work against complacency. These anxieties mean that military expansion enjoys widespread public support in Poland, a rare sight in the European bloc. So, in anticipation of declining American commitment, Poland wants to pick up the slack, and for good reason. Polish armed forces are in bad shape, performing poorly against much larger and better equipped Russia. In January 2021, Poland staged a series of war games known as Winter 20. It was the largest such exercise since the Cold War. The results, however, were not reassuring. The experiment found that despite NATO support, including high-tech weaponry such as F-35 fighters, Patriot anti-aircraft systems, and high-tech rocket launchers, Polish frontline forces would quickly lose up to 80% of their troops and equipment, pushing them back to the Vistula River, which hosts the capital Warsaw. Shortly thereafter, Russian forces would completely obliterate Poland's navy and air force. The exercise, scheduled for 22 days, ended in just 5 when Warsaw surrendered. The result was described as being worse than 1939. When the outcome of the war game leaked to the press, lawmakers capitalized on public sentiment to push for more military spending. A few months later, in October, Polish officials introduced a bill to parliament intending to boost national defense capacities. First and foremost, the bill would increase full-time military personnel from 110,000 to 250,000, and because numbers aren't everything, the bill would also seek to acquire new weapons while modernizing the current equipment and infrastructure of the Polish armed forces. About $7.3 billion has been set aside to upgrade Poland's defense over the next decade, including the procurement of missile defense batteries, cyber warfare capabilities, but also conventional stuff like helicopters, fighter jets, battle tanks, and frigates. Moreover, the bill would also reinforce the Territorial Defense Force, which is a civic militia established in the wake of the Ukrainian crisis as a deterrent against foreign incursions. The new plan would expand the militia of part-timers and volunteers from 30,000 to 50,000, allowing Warsaw to substantially raise the costs of a potential invasion at minimal expense to itself. Taken together, Polish military personnel would number 300,000, making it one of the largest in the European Union. Now, to finance the expansion, Warsaw plans on establishing an Armed Forces Support Fund, which would supplement military spending by using government-secured bonds issued by the National Development Bank, treasury bonds, and profits from the central bank. This unusual legal bypass is deliberate. The idea of military bonds rallies patriotic sentiment in addition to raising funds. So, two birds with one stone. Though much of the military modernization plan seems nationalistic in pretext, a powerful Poland would yield downstream benefits for NATO. Besides forming part of the alliance's eastern border, Poland fringes on the Suwalki Gap. This narrow strip of land straddles the Polish-Lithuanian border and is wedged between Belarus and Russia's Kaliningrad region. A pincer move by Moscow and Minsk could cleave the Baltics from the rest of NATO. It is therefore in NATO's interest to concentrate military resources on Polish territory. A stronger Polish military would also endow the country with significant political leverage. Being part of the European Union, Warsaw's nationalist political ideas have often collided with Brussels. For example, Poland's constitutional court recently declared its supremacy over EU law, causing the European Court of Justice to fine Warsaw 1 million euros a day. But even so, most of the Polish public supports the European project, making an exit unlikely. But having a more formidable military would yield leverage vis-à-vis continental European politics and allow Poland to gain strategic autonomy within the EU and NATO. That is a price worth pursuing. However, recent developments in Belarus may yet frustrate Warsaw's designs. Since Brussels imposed sanctions on Belarus last year, the country has retaliated through unconventional means. By transporting Middle Eastern migrants to the Polish border, Minsk caused an upsurge in attempted illegal border crossings from 120 in 2020 to over 33,000 this year. In response, Warsaw has dispatched more than 12,000 troops to police the border, a move supported by Germany and France. The EU has also doubled down, issuing additional sanctions. Still, by tying up Polish resources, Minsk seeks to throw its weight on both Poland and the EU. Meanwhile, Moscow has lent tacit support to Minsk. Nuclear-capable bombers have flown patrols over Belarusian territory, while Russian airlines facilitated the migrant influx. At the same time, Russia has increased its presence near Ukraine's border, and though a direct attack remains unlikely, the ambiguous atmosphere is keeping the West on edge. Poland sits in the middle of all these ongoing developments. Having a larger military, one that is more combat ready, would give ammunition to Polish rhetoric. It would provide Poland with more options without having to constantly consult with its Western partners when dealing with the growing trouble in the East. Of course, expanding the Polish military and gaining strategic autonomy will take time. But even so, on the European plane where nations are exposed, sometimes the only form of defense is to wrap oneself in a flag. I've been your host Shirvan from Caspian Report. If you like what we do, please consider joining our Patreon platform or YouTube membership, because doing so helps us to remain independent and self-sufficient. Thank you for your time, and Sahol.